There are some strange reasons to believe in a God, but when believers say they actually find it strange that they believe, they kind of take the wind from our sails, right? Well, maybe not. Hang around as we react to some of the strangest proof that the Quran is from Allah. I think this may be the first time I agree with a video. Hello, I'm the Skeptic, the British floating circle that watches people make extraordinary claims and then I explain why I don't accept what they're saying. It's definitely strange to me that folks accept things without proof. But when folks say they actually do have strange reasons for believing in things, but they still accept it, I find it questionable. Arabic 101 even posted a video that has the strangest proof that a book came from an undemonstrated being. Strange, right? However, before we find out some of the stranger things about Islam, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell to get more videos like this in your feed. And a super thanks to those that hit super thanks in some recent videos. Piao Meow Noir 8253, Tabor Turtle, The Revan Star, Andrew Jones 6693, Banana Slug 1951, and Travis W 888. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe bestows leaves upon you all. More hen. Is it strange I really want to know why Islam is correct?
Every single book in the world must have an author. The Noble Quran is, therefore, no exception. It is a book, so it must have an author. All Muslims believe that Allah is the one who revealed the Quran to Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him.
And leaves be upon Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe. How is it strange that a person wrote a book? So what if that person was someone who had convinced themselves that they were a prophet?
But those who do not believe so, they think otherwise. But who do they think wrote the Quran then? I mean, if they don't believe that the Quran is from Allah, then who is it from then?
Could it not just be from someone who convinced themselves that a floating sky wizard told them what to write? It's not unusual for people to have auditory hallucinations. Brains are tricky little buggers.
Because there aren't really many options, since Prophet Muhammad was the one who dictated the words to his companions, the writers of Wahy, to write it down.
That's like saying there aren't many options for There and Back Again being written by anyone other than Bilbo Baggins. I mean, if it wasn't the Hobbit that wrote it, who's to say it wasn't one of the many dwarves that accompanied him on his journey? Well, to be fair, we do know that that story's made up, though.
So, if they don't think it's from Allah, then it should be one of these four options, simply because there isn't any other possibility. So it should either be that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him,
leaf be upon her,
authored the Quran himself. The second possibility would be that he used the previous books, like the Bible or the Torah, to write the Quran. Third, a Christian or a Jewish person had helped Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him,
leaf be upon her,
to write the Quran. Or fourth, it was Satan who had helped the Prophet to write the Quran and tell him about the news of former nations that he hadn't witnessed.
Those aren't the only options. There could be any number of extra things. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe, leaf be upon her, could have written the Quran as a test of rainbow faith. However, as the prophet of our rainbow deity, I can tell you she didn't. I just feel that knowledge in my heart. What about the option that someone could have just made the whole bloody thing up?
So these four are the only possibilities there are. If the Quran was not from Allah.
No, they're not.
There are no other options as to where the Quran came from.
There are no other options you can think of? That's more a you problem.
So, if we can disprove or refute these four possibilities, then we're left with the only remaining possibility, which is that it is from Allah.
Or one of the thousands of other possibilities. Aliens wrote it. Someone thought they were hearing the words from a god. Drug use. Or still my current favourite, someone made it up.
So let's look at these possibilities one by one and see how they stack up. First, Prophet Muhammad was the one who authored the Quran himself. And if you do think so, then how can you explain the following problems? The first problem is the style of writing. We do know how the Prophet talked and what his style looked like. How? We do indeed have thousands of ahadith, which are the quotations and sayings of the Prophet. So we know exactly what the style of these sayings look like. and it doesn't take an expert to realize the big difference between the style of the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him,
Leaf be upon her,
and the style of the Quran. It clearly shows two distinct styles of writing.
If anything, that's more supporting evidence that someone else entirely made it up. If you're already in the mindset that a book is divinely inspired and you discount the Prophet, that doesn't automatically mean a god did it. Terry Pratchett wrote about a Discworld sitting on top of 4 elephants who were standing on the shell of a giant tortoise flying through space, which is a completely different style to Trudy Canavan writing about her Magician trilogy. It's not supernatural for one to have not written the other's work.
The second problem, blaming the Prophet, peace be upon him,
Leaf be upon her,
in the Quran. The Quran contains several blaming verses, or in Arabic, ayatul itab, where the Prophet, peace be upon him, is blamed for certain actions, like عفى الله عنك لما أذنت لهم حتى يتبين لك الذين صدقوا وتعلم الكاذبين.
Beautiful. But now I've heard that, it just sounds like this whole thing was supposed to be an operatic performance that people misunderstood and now think it actually is the word of a god.
Or يا أيها النبي لم تحرم ما أحل الله لك تبتغي مرضات أزواجك.
Am I missing what's happening here? What is the Prophet even being blamed for? Dude wanted to get down with his wives and didn't do something that someone else told him an undemonstrated God had said. So because the Prophet wouldn't have written about himself that way, it's obvious he didn't write the Quran. That's not proof that a God did it. If not a prophet, then a God is not the only option.
Or in this example, عبس وتولى أن جاءه الأعمى.
Because people own their mistakes? Or because it's made up?
And there are many other examples belonging to the same category. So if it was the Prophet himself who wrote the Quran, why would he blame himself in front of his companions? It is just simply not logical. The third problem is the prophecies. The Quran contains many prophecies about many events, some of which actually came true in the time of the Prophet, like the one in Surah Ar-Rum. غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ في أدنى الأرض وهم من بعد غلبهم سيغلبون في بضع سنين.
It's not a prophecy if it's writing something in the past. That's a retelling. And then saying they'll fight back in a certain amount of time, in a time when fighting back was common, isn't impressive in the slightest. Keep trying.
Or the prophecy about the liberation of Mecca, or Fath Mecca, in Surah Al-Fath. لَتَدْخُلُنَّ الْمَسْجِدَ الْحَرَامَ إِن شَاءَ اللَّهُ آمِنِينَ مُحَلِّقِينَ رُؤُوسَكُمْ وَمُقَصِّرِينَ لَا تَخَافُونَ.
Again, it's not a prophecy if you read somewhere that you have to do some head shaving and whatnot to please a god, and then you shave your head to please a god.
If the Prophet wrote the Quran himself, how could he have known things that were going to happen in the future? Wouldn't it be a big gamble losing your status among your companions if he predicted that something would happen and it didn't happen?
Unless, of course, the things were written after they happened in a way that seemed like they were being written before they happened. Or if the things that were written were things like, one day a man called Barney will eat a cheese stick, and then a guy called Barney sees this verse and eats a cheese stick to make it come true.
The fourth problem is the delay of revelations. In certain incidents, the wahi, or the revelation, was delayed. Like when a Jewish man came to the Prophet asking him about the people of the cave, But the Prophet said that he would answer him tomorrow, expecting the wahi, but without saying Insha'Allah. And so the wahi was delayed. Also, when his own wife was falsely accused in her honor, the wahi was delayed as well, which was a very difficult time for the Prophet, peace be upon him.
Peace be upon her.
If he was the one making the Quran, wouldn't it have been more convenient for him to just come up with an answer in these situations and clear his name and his wives among his companions? These were not the only two incidents, but there are other situations in which the Prophet couldn't give a direct answer because he had to wait for the wahi.
So in one instance, the Prophet could predict stuff, but then in the next, he didn't have a clue. Yeah, isn't that just evidence that the book isn't divinely inspired?
Problem number 5. The challenge. The Quran contains many verses that challenge anyone who doesn't believe it. The challenge was to produce anything like it. The Quran even challenges humans and the jinn for that. If the Prophet, a human, had made the Quran himself, why would he risk embarrassing himself needlessly by challenging all humans and jinn to produce something like it?
Arrogance? To be fair though, Joseph Smith produced something like it, something that claims to be divinely inspired that many folks accept to be divinely inspired, though many Muslims would say, well, no, our book says this, which that book doesn't. But then the Mormons would say, oh, yes, but our book says this, which yours doesn't. And then there's a great war between Muslims and Mormons over whose book is more factual. Wait, sorry, I think I got carried away.
Problem number 6. The personal information of the Prophet. The Quran contains no personal information about the Prophet, not his life, his children, or his wives. His name was mentioned in the entire Quran only 4 times, which is much fewer than the mention of other prophets.
So?
Like Moses, who was mentioned 134 times, and his story came in 34 surahs of the Quran. Jesus was also mentioned dozens of times. Abraham, Noah, Joseph, and other prophets. So if he was the one who had made the Quran himself, wouldn't he have given himself more credit, or at least talked about his struggles more often? So as we can see here, this first possibility, that the Prophet came up with the Quran himself, is actually illogical and full of problems and questions for which there are no answers.
Or answers you don't accept because it really makes you question your position, which is an uncomfortable thing to do when you're a believer.
Conclusion: it is impossible that the Prophet could have written the Quran himself.
No, it's absolutely possible. I think I mentioned myself, once per video? Wouldn't I give myself more credit for being so brilliant? No, because I'm trying to be modest.
But could it be that he used the help of others? Well, then let's look at possibility number 2. The Prophet used previous books like the Bible or the Torah to write the Quran. And this possibility could easily be refuted because the Prophet was illiterate, which means that he could not read or write.
He was illiterate but still managed to write things? Ha! You know, people can have books read to them and they can retain the information, not always completely, and then recount them with missing parts and then fill in the gaps. And each time the story's told, it gets embellished a little more. I have a great story about me where I ended up peeing up the back of someone at a concert. It all started out that I peed in a bottle, so...
And even if we assume that he was not illiterate, where would he have got hold of the Bible or the Torah in Arabic?
Hold up. Even if we don't assume that he was illiterate, so it is an assumption that he's illiterate, doesn't that change everything? And there are translations of things everywhere. People do speak multiple languages, you know.
Did you know that the first Arabic translation of the Bible was made in the 9th century?
Maybe the first record of it happening, but did you know that in 2016 it was the hottest year in Europe since records began? That doesn't mean that it never got hot before that though, buddy.
Which is 100 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Leaf be upon her.
Then how could he have read it? Added to that, and until around the 18th century, the church was essentially hiding the Bible from common people and forbade its translation. So the Bible was not just readily available, let alone a translation thereof.
So no one spoke about the Bible or learned about its words because no one ever spoke of it and passed on the stories inside? Oh, okay.
This leaves us with no other conclusion than that the Prophet could not have used the previous books to write the Quran.
Really do jump to some strange conclusions with the evidence presented.
This possibility is off the table. Moving to possibility number 3. If the Prophet didn't write the Quran himself, he didn't read previous books, was it then a Jew or a Christian that helped the Prophet write the Quran?
I bet you're going to say no.
If we sift through all the authenticated hadith, you will only find a single hadith about the encounter between the Prophet and someone called Waraqa ibn Nawfal, a Christian. However, the Prophet met Waraqa ibn Nawfal after the wahi or the revelation came to him, not before.
I've hung out with friends many times and it's not been documented, so that's ridiculous. I played foosball against Forrest Valkai, the renegade science teacher, which I have photographic evidence of. And we also slow danced together, which I don't have photographic evidence of. That doesn't mean I've only had one interaction with him, so that's silly. Sorry, strange.
Furthermore, based on authenticated hadith, Waraqa even testified that Muhammad, peace be upon him,
Leaf be upon her,
was the Prophet. So how could he have been the one who would help him to write the Quran? And even if it wasn't Waraqa and it was some other Christian or Jew who would help the Prophet to write the Quran, how could they allow him to write verses like these? لقد كفر الذين قالوا إن الله هو المسيح ابن مريم.
Because they may have decided that the books of the Bible didn't make sense to them, so they came up with a new set of passages to make their religion sound better. A lot like finding some golden plates and not letting anyone else see them.
Or a verse like this. لتجدن أشد الناس عداوة للذين آمنوا اليهود والذين أشركوا.
Because a Christian may write about someone from an older Judaic faith, or a Jewish person may say that kind of thing about someone from a newer version of Christianity.
How can it make sense that a Jew or a Christian would help the Prophet write something like that?
Money? Being forced out of their religion because of some mistakes they made? A practical joke?
This problem leaves us no choice but to say that it is impossible for anyone to have helped the Prophet write the Quran. Now, moving to the final possibility. Since the Prophet was able to tell prophecies and knew things a human could not have known, then it must be Satan who would help him write the Quran. And this is indeed one of the most illogical possibilities, since we, as Muslims, are taught to seek refuge from Satan before starting to recite the Quran. فإذا قرأت القرآن فاستعذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
We can definitely discount this one, right? Since, like any of the gods, Satan has never been demonstrated to exist either. That one was easy.
Added to that, there are numerous verses in the Quran declaring Satan as the mortal foe of the human. So how could it be possible that Satan helped the Prophet to write verses cursing Satan himself and declaring him as the enemy?
Because if it was real, it wanted to make itself seem really scary. I don't know.
And why would Satan tell his plan to tempt humans and expose himself like that?
To tempt humans and expose itself.
Therefore, it is impossible for Satan to have helped the Prophet write the Quran. And now that all four possibilities out there are off the table, we're left with the only possibility, that it is from the one with unlimited omniscient knowledge, that the Quran is from Allah.
Well, that God doesn't know much since it made a fair few mistakes, my favourite being the whole semen thing, that the Quran states semen is produced from somewhere between the backbone and the ribs, but then Muslims will say that it's a mistranslation and that it's true because of the line between the sternum and the coccyx has the area that makes semen in it. It's about the same as saying the mouth is between the eyeballs and the back of the brain.
And what better way to end this video than with Allah's words addressing those who deny the Quran.
Oh, yeah, that's me.
إِنَّهُ لَقَوْلُ رَسُولٍ كَرِيمٍ.
This is indeed the word of a God because it says so. Sorry, not. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The only circular thing around here is me.
ذي قوة عند ذي العرش مكين مطاع ثم أمين وما صاحبكم بمجنون ولقد رآه بالأفق المبين وما هو على الغيب بضنين وما هو بقول شيطان رجيم فأين تذهبون إن هو إلا ذكر للعالمين لمن شاء منكم أن يستقيم وما تشاءون إلا أن يشاء الله رب العالمين.
Well, I'm not sure if any of that was supposed to be a way of demonstrating that a god wrote things, but it didn't. So, if the point of this was to point out why it's strange that folks accept the Quran was written by an undemonstrated wizard of the sky, congrats. You absolutely nailed it. I still find it strange that folks accept something that hasn't been proven and will twist things to make it seem plausible. However, I'm going to skeptic this as being accurate with its strangeness. A big thank you to this month's top-level ticks on Patreon. Addy Rockhart, the Enixes, Elizabeth, Jakari, and the absolute lunatic Travis, as well as all the $3 base ticks. You can become a supporter on Patreon too at patreon.com/theskeptic. The link is in the description, along with links to all my other socials. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, the Skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically, and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.